Yo, what's good? NBA YouTube. It's your man 100 grand, but The Rock never stops. Coming to you with another episode of NBA Talk. Today, we got to go in on the amazing performance, and I would say performances, of one Gary Trent Jr. and just what his outlook can be with the Toronto Raptors. If you like this video, hit that like button for me. Hit subscribe and the bell for notifications. There's times when you see a player and you look at how they're performing and you can project what they can be potentially, right? And you generally want to watch them for, at least a good segment of the season. And then from there, you kind of get a glimpse of what their potential is. When I first started watching Gary Trent Jr. and really started paying attention to him, it was with the Portland Trailblazers. And it was around the time of the bubble. I think CJ McCollum was dealing with injuries. Um, just the team in general was dealing with injuries, and they really needed somebody to step up. Gary Trent Jr. I don't know if he went undrafted. Somebody look it up for me and let me know. But I'm pretty sure he went overlooked big time. In spite of being a five-star recruit, son of former NBA player Gary Trent, played with Sacramento Kings, Toronto Raptors, and a bunch of other teams, a journeyman. Um, in spite of being recruited to Duke University within a top-tier class of recruits, namely Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter Jr., and Trey Jones, he was of that roster starting for that team, took a step back so he can be a part of a winning team. What ended up happening was that step back ended up getting him overlooked, and as a result, over scrutinized. And so he fell in the draft big time. So all that's to say is that it's never been about a lack of talent. Just for some reason, people overlooked him. And it happens. It's common. So Gary Trent had to go to work. He had to get humble, which happens quite often in the NBA. But that humility forced him to go back to the drawing board and look at how he could force his way onto a roster. And how he did it was through defense and playing with tenacity, as if he had to prove something every single game. As a result, the Portland Trailblazers pick him up, and eventually in the bubble, he begins to get playing time. And what do you know? Gary Trent Jr. becomes Portland's best perimeter defender in that playoff run. And when I say best perimeter defender, I mean an indispensable defender because they didn't have it. And he's having to guard the other team's best perimeter player each night in the playoffs, and actually doing a phenomenal job. This is with no experience in guarding the best players over years, learning all the tricks of the trade and how to not get certain calls made on you and really validating your defensive potential so refs give you the benefit of the doubt. He's doing this in the playoffs. And what you saw is eventually they had to start incorporating him more into the offense because he was out there on the court for such a long period of time. And so he began to be able to show some of his shooting prowess. And that only opened things up for the Portland Trailblazers. Now, for me, I was already, after seeing this, I was like, yo, this young man deserves a real chance. He needs to get signed and locked up. But instead, Portland decides to go another route. They decide to trade him for Norman Powell. I thought it was a mistake. I thought Norman Powell was too small at 6'2" to be playing next to two other 6'2" small guards who aren't elite defenders, who lack size on the perimeter. But Neil O'Shea did it, and the rest is kind of history. After Gary Trent Jr. goes to the Toronto Raptors, he has some explosive games. I think he had a 40-point game when they was tanking the season after the bubble. They were playing in Florida, and they were just like, let's just see what these guys can do. And Gary Trent showed that he was more than just a defender, more than just an elite perimeter defender. He was also a big time scorer. Well, here comes this season, and it's the return of the starters, the guys who went to the NBA Finals and brought Toronto's first banner to the franchise. Fred Van Vliet, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, even guys like Chris Boucher. And so all of a sudden, you've got these veterans returning, and it's prove it time. He gets his contract. Today, we could look at that contract and be like one of the best contracts in the NBA. He's getting underpaid for what he's doing. But back then, it was fair. It was more than fair. It was like, yes, you deserve this, and we're looking forward to you to continuing to prove that you deserve this. But all of a sudden, you see him with this roster as everybody gets healthy. Scotty Barnes is showing up. You got other players coming off the bench like Delano Banton. And all of a sudden, you begin to see this guy, Gary Trent Jr., begin to find his legs, find his rhythm. And now, over the past 5 games, you've seen him not just find his rhythm, but show that he can be an explosive scorer. It's interesting in an interview, Fred Van Vliet talks about Gary Trent Jr. being a rock star. Now, if you look at him, he's got the rock star look. You know what I'm saying? He's got the locks flowing, tied up. You know what I mean? He's got the tattoos. He's got that flair about him. Almost got that little J.R. Smith swagger, but he plays defense and he has a higher basketball IQ. But he's got that give me the ball and I'm going to do something. And if I get hot, it's a wrap. And against the last 5 teams, playoff teams, Charlotte Hornets, Atlanta Hawks, Miami Heat, I believe I forget the other one that it was as well. But he showed that he could lead the team to victory, to victory. And that's the difference between a lot of players who are talented, who can score, and those who can also score and be a part of winning. And so now all of a sudden, after 5 straight games of over 30 points each game, you have to start thinking, is this really who he is? Is he somebody who can be a 23 to 25 points a game scorer? Can he be a Clay Thompson? I mean, well, when you look at him, he's built. He's built like a tight end, 6'6", 210, good length, great quickness, agility. And one of the best things about him is he has an incredible motor. He's got that motor that he don't not just mind running all day on offense, running around screens, but he can also get up into you on defense each and every play. On top of that, he can also create off the ball, whether it's in the pick and roll or just going one on one and getting a shot off from mid range, getting to the cup, little post up, or a step back behind the 3-point line. And he's showing this repertoire at a level and during a time for the Toronto Raptors where they're trying to make a run for the playoffs and get a higher seeding. And he's a big part of that. And so we have to ask, is this really who he is? Because if this is who he is, we're going to have to start looking at this roster differently. We're going to start having to look at how this team is playing from night to night. It's almost at a point where it's reminding me a lot of that Atlanta Hawks team that won about 60 games. And I think they had 4 All Stars, but guys that were averaging over 20 points a game. It was Paul Millsap, um, Al Horford, Jeff Teague, and I forget the wing. I mean, it might have been Kyle Korver or somebody like that. But it was a collection of high level players who were performing at a high level consistently and together within a great system that allowed them to be able to be one of the best teams in the NBA and a contender. And of course, that Hawks team ran into the railroad that was a LeBron James, right? There's no shame in that. But it's to say that this team reminds me a lot of him. And I don't know if there's a LeBron James that can just railroad this team. Matter of fact, Miami Heat was the railroading team from my books. If you look at my projections at the beginning of the season, the Miami Heat was a team that I said nobody's going to want to see in the playoffs because they're built for it. But to see this Toronto Raptors team go at them in the way that they have, it tells me that they got a little something. They got a little something. They still got holes. They still got holes. They still got holes. And so, for me, I think Gary Trent Jr. definitely has that over 20 points per game type potential. I think he's showing it right now. I think moving forward, Masai Ujiri is going to have to really look at how can he begin to complement him as he adds more pieces. Because I guarantee you, Masai Ujiri is not going to sit on Goran Dragic's contract. It's only got what, one more season, I believe, or am I in this season? I actually believe. Um, Check it real quick. I should. This is important information. But Goran Dragic contract is one of the best out there because one, he's only got 1 year left on it. Just looked it up for 18 million. That's extremely movable. You can either move it as a part of bringing back a bigger player who's making around that money, if not more. Somebody like a Jonas Valanciunas, um, somebody from Indiana, right? But more than likely, he's going to go someplace that can bring back a piece to add on their run into the playoffs. And so I'm actually going to do a video about that coming up. But it's to say that Gary Trent Jr. is solidifying him not just as a part of the core, but a part of the leadership, where that's going to take this team back to where they want to go as a title contender. So let me know what y'all think. Is Gary Trent Jr. somebody that's going to be leading this team back to the NBA Finals? Do you think he could be a primary scorer, secondary scorer, third best option on a championship team? Let me know what you think. All right, and I'll be sure to respond to all the comments. Other than that, if you like this video, smash that like button for me. Hit subscribe and the bell for notifications. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.